A new genetic test was done. No spotlight, no headlines. And what it reveals about Julia Faustina could reignite the entire Madeleine McCann case. Today, we're going to crack open the hidden code that genetics unveiled, and that so far, no one has had the courage to face publicly. Sometimes the truth doesn't vanish, it just stays quiet, like a faint noise coming from a locked room. You hear it, but you'd rather ignore it. That's more or less how Julia Faustina's new genetic test came to light. No fanfare, no headlines, no urgency. A cold technical document, but with one detail no one wanted to see. It didn't deny. And it didn't confirm either. It just unsettled. Julia, the girl the whole world treated as a joke, an imposter, an exaggeration. At the height of the mockery, when everyone already had their minds made up, she did something quiet. She sought out a lab far from the spotlight, a place that didn't care about fame, just data, and they delivered a report, with answers no one asked to read. What does this test show? Perhaps the real question is, why didn't anyone want to know? While some were using filters to mock the resemblance between faces, someone was trying to understand what their own blood was saying, but no one was there to listen. The media had already moved on, the headlines had gone cold. The public? They'd laughed and moved forward, but the code remained. And what if the truth wasn't in the words spoken, but in the absence of those? Who should have spoken them? Silence doesn't hurt because it's empty. It hurts because it's full of refusal. Julia didn't get a clear no. She got something worse, indifference. And this test carries that. It's not just a genetic matter. It's a portrait of how we choose to ignore what doesn't fit. Even when it comes with numbers, with analysis, with evidence. The pain of someone who sought to know who they are, and, instead of answers, received silence. Not from science, but from everything else. No one discussed what the test said, no one wanted to, because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted to be feared. It just needs to exist. Today, we're going to open what was sealed shut, not to prove a theory, but to understand what the silence tried to hide. Because that code is still there, waiting for someone brave enough to read it. If this unsettles you as much as it unsettled me, stay with me, because the part that matters comes now. It all started the way faint noises turn into storms, with a post. A young, frail Polish girl with dark circles under her eyes, carrying more than her years, saying what no one dared to say. I think I'm Madeleine McCann. The internet did what it does best. It laughed, it spread, it edited side-by-side videos with old photos of the missing girl. It zoomed in on eyes, teeth, compared noses. Some believed and others mocked until it became a meme. And meanwhile, Julia was there, trying to figure out if her own memory was just confusion or a call. I don't remember my childhood. Something's wrong. She said it in a low voice. No theatrics, no grand speeches. Just trying to piece together fragments no one wanted to touch. But the internet's time is fast and cruel. A preliminary DNA test, done in haste with superficial analysis, was enough for everyone to say, it's proven, she's not. And then came the avalanche. News outlets deleted their stories. Experts changed their tune. People who once said, what if, started laughing, embarrassed they'd ever believed. But what did that test really prove? Few dug deeper. It said Julia had mostly Polish ancestry, which for many was enough to end the conversation. But Madeleine could also have genetic traces from different regions. And more, the test wasn't cross-checked with Madeleine's parents' DNA. No samples from the McCann family were involved. In other words, the test didn't say she's not. It said we don't know, but no one wanted to hear that. So Julia, now alone, discredited, did what few would have the courage to do. She sought a new test, in another country, with another method, far from the eyes that had already decided her fate. This second test was done in silence. No press, no lawyer, just her and a lab willing to analyze her blood without bias, just data, pure genetics. The report came weeks later. It carried a delicate piece of information that no one reported. Partial genetic compatibility with individuals from the McCann lineage. It wasn't confirmation, but it wasn't denial either. The document alone wouldn't prove everything, but it raised a new question, a question that now no one wanted to answer. Why wasn't this test debated publicly? Why did the media, so quick to debunk, not even mention this new data? Maybe because the answer would complicate things. Maybe because silence was more comfortable than reopening an old wound. Or perhaps because accepting this doubt would mean admitting they mocked too soon. Julia saw the whole world laugh at the most human quest there is, to know who you are. Her identity became a spectacle, and when the show lost its appeal, she was left in the dark. But the code was there, on paper, cold, technical, carrying something no one wanted to decipher. "Why don't they say anything?" she asked once. Not with anger, then with exhaustion, like someone who expected an answer and got silence. And here's the part that scares me most. Maybe it's not about who she is, but about what it means, if she is. If there's even a tiny chance she's Madeline, then everything that was closed reopens. The investigation's mistakes, the official versions, the gray area between truth and convenience. And then what do we do when the doubt wasn't resolved, just buried? Because the code didn't disappear. It's still there, written, waiting for someone to finally decide to read what was left behind. And what if the problem isn't what the test shows, but what it might force the world to face? The test didn't come in a sealed envelope with red highlights. It came by email, a cold, technical PDF, but one that seemed to pulse from within. The kind of document that if you don't know what to look for, you see nothing. But if you do, you see too much. The methodology was different from the first, more modern, more precise. Instead of mapping broad ancestry, it cross-checked specific genetic markers, and among those data points a number appeared, a rate of similarity with an archived genetic profile, Jerry McCanns. It wasn't high enough to confirm direct kinship, but it wasn't negligible either. It was the kind of number that, if it showed up in a criminal database, would trigger a new investigation. But here, it triggered nothing. Julia received the report alone, opened the screen, read it, stared at it for minutes. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. She just closed the laptop and went for a walk in the city, as if her body needed to process what her mind couldn't yet name. No authority commented, no news outlet published. The test existed, but it was as if it had never been born, as if its mere lack of shouting made it invisible. But it wasn't invisible. It said something too uncomfortable to become a headline. There's a section here that says Julia's profile shows statistical similarities compatible with members of the paternal lineage of the McCann family. That's what's in the document. Dry, clean, undeniable. It's not a confirmation, but it's not a no either. And maybe that's what scares people most, because from here, the game changes. It's no longer about believing or not believing. It's about what to do with data no one asked for, but now exists. And even without being definitive, it carries a power that no social media post or public statement could achieve. It plants doubt, and the right doubt, in the right place, changes everything. The immediate consequence wasn't scandal. It was silence. A strange silence. Not the kind that protects, but the kind that buries. Julia didn't run to social media. She didn't make a tearful video. She just looked at the paper and said, in an audio to a friend that was never posted but reached us, "Maybe now I know even less about who I am." That was it. Because sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It dismantles you. And her reaction was everything. The world didn't know how to handle, because they expected a debunked imposter or a lost daughter reclaimed. No one was ready to face a girl who isn't sure of anything, but holds in her hands a fragment that could topple everything that's been said. The twist here isn't the test. It's what it forces us to face. And what if all along the question wasn't is she or isn't she, but rather, why doesn't anyone want to know if she could be? Because if she is, then everything comes back. The investigation, the mistakes, the assumptions sold as certainties, the parents' pain, the rush to close the case. And more than that, our collective responsibility comes back, because all of us, media, public, institutions, helped silence a search that might have been saying something real, but too real to accept. The emotional pause hits here, like a lump in the throat of someone speaking. It's strange how certain truths only hurt when they fall into silence, when they have no defense, no applause, just an echo. And what if the problem isn't the result, but what it forces us to face? That question is now open, and the code still pulses. Some stories don't need a plot twist to turn everything upside down, just a forgotten sentence tucked in a corner of the report, and the silence that followed it. The genetic code doesn't scream, it whispers. On the screen, the report had been read, the compatibility rate processed, the numbers gone cold. But the real effect started afterward, in the way Julia began to walk, less hurried, heavier, as if she were carrying something no one saw. But in a short message to a friend, the same one who received the first audio, she let slip a simple sentence. Maybe I'll never find out who I am, but now I know I didn't lie to myself. That was it. And that said more than any report, because in that moment the story wasn't about being or not being Madeleine. It was about the right not to be erased just because the doubt bothers people. The silence around the test, from authorities, from the press, even from the McCann family, didn't disprove anything. It just avoided, like someone closing their eyes to avoid dealing with what might be too true. But Julia carried on, not as an answer, but as a living question. On the outside, the public narrative kept trying to stick to a more comfortable version. The world preferred to keep calling Toyota hoax a fabrication. It was easier that way, but there was the evidence, not definitive, but enough to unsettle, because if there's a code no one wants to read, the problem isn't the code, it's the people pretending it doesn't exist. Julia became a symbol of something bigger, of all the people trying to piece together their own fragments, and before they can finish, someone throws it all away. She became a mirror for those who've doubted their own memory, their own face, their own story. And then a truth emerged, like someone coming back to collect an old debt. Identity isn't just DNA, but it's also not just documents or appearance. It's the sound of a voice saying, "This is who I am," and the world listening. Or not. The real wound is this: when the world chooses not to listen, the hidden code then changed shape. It was no longer just that technical data in the test. It became a metaphor for everything carried in silence, the things no one reads because they don't want to, or because reading it would change too many ready-made certainties, and that confronts us as a society, because deep down, Julia's story reveals more about us than about her. It shows how far we're willing to go to delegitimize someone just because we can't fit them in. How much doubt bothers us more than lies. How much we prefer labels over risks. And above all, how noise can bury the truth when we get used to laughing before listening. Maybe in the end, the question was never, is she Madeleine? Maybe what really matters now is, what if she were? Would we be ready to face everything that would unearth? The investigation's flaws, the police's silences, the rushed judgments, the online massacre? Or would we rather keep pretending everything's been resolved, just because it's easier to sleep with that idea? Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs not to be denied. And that's where the hidden code does its job. It's still there, even ignored, even discredited. But now you know it exists. And maybe that alone is already the start of another story. We live in a world that screams opinions, but whispers when it encounters something that doesn't fit the narrative. And in this case, what bothers me most isn't what was said about Julia. It's what was silenced. You might not believe her. You might think it's exaggeration, invention, or delusion, but there's something no one can deny. She sought to know who she was, and that takes a courage that many who point fingers never had. A test was done. No cameras, no headlines, no show. And what it brought wasn't a definitive answer. It was a question no one wants to ask out loud. What if it's true? If it's true, we'll have to rethink everything. How we handled the case, how we treated her, how we treat anyone who has doubts about themselves and chooses to face them instead of burying them. That report almost no one wanted to read is less about genetics and more about collective shame, because it forces us to look at our own reflection and ask, what did I do when someone asked to be heard? Julia didn't get a verdict, she got silence. And the silence in this case says more than any statement, because silence is a choice, it's refusal, it's fear disguised as disdain. The genetic result didn't deliver irrefutable proof, but it pointed to a path that if followed could shake structures, reopen wounds, dismantle certainties, and the world chose not to follow, because deep down the truth was never the problem. The problem is what it demands when it appears, change. And not everyone wants to change. Seeing all this made me think about how many people have gone through life without knowing exactly where they came from, without a place, without a true name, without memories, and worse, when they decided to ask, they were treated as inconveniences, as if they had no right to doubt. Julia's story, to me, is no longer about genetic identity. It's about the right to exist, even when your existence challenges the comfort of those watching. She became a symbol, not because she wanted to, but because the world's reaction pushed her into it. And the strongest symbol of all isn't in her face or in the test. It's in what we did or didn't do it when we saw it all happen. It's strange how the truth, when it doesn't fit, becomes noise, and the noise becomes a meme, and the meme becomes nothing. But some people don't forget. People who saw, felt hurt, and were left with that question stuck in their throat. What if it's true? You know, some stories the whole world tries to silence, but it only takes one voice, one memory, one whispered sentence to keep that flame alive. If you listen to this story until now, maybe it's because you too carry something unresolved. Maybe because you too were discredited before being understood. And if that's the case, then you understand the value of not letting this conversation die. If this story moved you, the super chat isn't just a gesture, it's a message. I heard. It's a sign that this story matters, that you didn't just stay until the end, you felt it, that you understand what it's like to carry a code no one wants to read. Hear what the genetics tried to say. If you heard it too, this is your moment to say, I'm here. Now, there's something I need to tell you honestly. When I started writing this script, I thought it was just another story about a famous case. But halfway through, I realized it was about me too, about us, about every piece of ourselves we try to understand, and that the world tries to erase. Julia became a mirror, the broken side, the confused side, the side that just wants to know, who am I? And sometimes the answer doesn't come, but the search itself is already courage enough. If you made it this far, then maybe you already know. This story doesn't end, and that's why the next video will stir something even deeper. It's for those who've wondered what happens when the truth is uncovered, but no one wants to accept it. A story about buried confessions, about an unanswered letter, about what we choose to forget, and what stays alive even in silence. I won't tell you watch it, I'll just say it's not over. Now, I want to know what this stirred in you. Write in the comments. It can be just one sentence, but let it come from within. Tell me, what was the moment that stuck, the wound that reopened, the doubt that surfaced? If you stayed until now, comment. I am the one who doesn't forget. I'll read every single one, because some stories we don't let pass. And this was one of them. And if, even after all this, you still feel like something's left hanging, then subscribe to the channel, not to follow me, but to keep this conversation going, because it doesn't end here. And those who send a super chat here aren't just spectators. They're part of this story. They're the ones who chose to listen, even when the whole world had already turned away. Not every silence is forgetting, and not every doubt needs an answer. Sometimes it just needs to be felt. I'll be back soon, and when I do, we'll pick up from here.